All right, guys, so we're back in the shop this afternoon. The kids are here. Billy's back here working on his truck. What are you doing, Junior?
Taking the water meth kit out.
You're taking it clear out?
Yeah, I'm just going to take it out. I don't want to risk it leaking anymore. I tried to drain the tank. There's still a little bit left in it.
So last weekend we were at Pacemakers. After reviewing some of the videos, we noticed that the truck had a little drip coming from the left front, like the front bumper. And the only thing we can think of is either the petcock for the radiator dripping, which I don't think that's what it was, or the water meth kit is still bolted to the fender. I'll show it to you here. So when we were on E85, we used the water meth kit to spray water and methanol through injector nozzles. There was one here and there was one down there, and that cooled the intake charge to knock the IATs down. Inlet air temperature is what IAT stands for those of you that may not be familiar. So anyway, once we put it on methanol, switch to alcohol, from E85, we haven't used this water meth kit, but the tank still had water meth in it, and one of the hoses was just kind of tucked up here in the fender. And Billy feels like that may have been leaking. We saw it dripping on the track, right?
Yeah, every time it would bump in, you could see a couple drips when the truck would rock back and forth, and I think the water meth would slosh around and a little bit would run down the tube.
I see. So you're just going to remove the entire thing?
Yeah.
All right. Well, don't throw it away or nothing, because we might have to put it back on if we ever decide to put it back on E85, which...
It's never going to go back on the 85 to race.
Not to race it, just to cruise around.
Yeah.
So he's going to take the meth kit completely off of it. Take a little weight out of the truck. I mean, that pump's pretty heavy.
Pump might be 10 pounds. Everything might be 10 pounds. When this is full, I mean, a gallon is what, 5 pounds?
I don't know. So Billy's working on taking the water meth kit out of the truck. And I've got a little something I was going to share with everybody tonight on the blue truck. As a maintenance thing, it's a good idea every once in a while to flow the fuel side, set your fuel pressure on the fuel side with a flow tool. So some of you may not be aware of what a flow tool is. This is a flow gauge. It's a 6-inch Nitrous Express flow gauge. And I'll take this apart and I'll explain to you what's in it. There's a 73 thousandths nitrous jet in the red fitting here. And that's kind of an industry standard. The 73 jet is kind of an industry standard for setting fuel pressure flowing. So let me take this apart and I'll show you where the jet is. Okay, so I removed the fuel line. It would be a return line that goes back into the tank. And as you can see, there's a little jet right here in the end. And that's a 73 thousandths nitrous jet, an 073 jet. So what this does is you have fuel pressure that comes into one side. In this case, it's the black fuel line that you see here. And the fuel pressure is run through this 73 jet and then back out the return line, which is laying here on my messy cart. And that line just routes back to the tank. And in this case, well, you can put it in a fuel can if you wanted to. But in this case, we just route it back into the standalone tank right there. So I'm going to go ahead and hook this thing up and show you guys how you do this. Okay, so the first thing here, this is our fuel pressure regulator for the nitrous right here. And this is just a liquid filled gauge I use for reference, just to keep an eye on it. It's not anything I would rely on solely. It's simply just as a reference. When we fire the truck up for the day and we're warming it up, I can turn the nitrous kit on and just check to see what the fuel pressure reads. I know that the fuel pressure for the carburetor is generally set at around 6.5 pounds, and as long as this one reads about the same, I know what they are. But anyway, first thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen our fuel line fitting on the output side of the regulator. As you can see, this is the fuel pressure regulator. This is the input. This is your fuel pressure in, and this is a return style regulator. So it has on the bottom, it's maybe hard to see there, you can see this is the return, that's the return fitting, and that return line comes back here and dumps in the top of the standalone tank right here. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and pull this -6 line off. This is the pressure line. Lay it down there. We're going to connect our flow gauge next. Okay, so we've got our flow gauge attached to the fuel pressure regulator right here. Okay, fitting's tight. We have our return line out of the back side of the jet, just run into the standalone tank. And we are just about ready to check our flowing fuel pressure. Now, one thing that you want to make sure of, and all these gauges are a little bit different, but the Nitrous Express gauge that I have says in the instructions that you have to make sure that the needle says 0 to begin with. There's a rubber plug here in the top that you may have to pull out to relieve internal pressure inside the gauge to reset the needle to 0. As you can see, it is on 0. Also of note, you do not want to have the fuel pressure gauge much higher than the solenoids. If you have the fuel pressure gauge up above the carburetor, it'll read different than if it's down at about the level of the solenoid. So we're just about the level of solenoid, close enough for the girls we run with anyway. So we have the 73 jet in it. The gauge is on 0. It's attached and mounted here at about the same height as the solenoids. So we are ready to turn the nitrous system on and turn the pump on. Now what this is going to do is it's going to show us the fuel pressure while the system is flowing through that 73 jet. It's just a reference point, but it's very important that you know where you're starting from, especially if it's a new combination you've never run. You start out between 6.5, 7 PSI. Okay, so we're just going to check this and see where it comes out at. All right, so key is on. We're going to arm the system. You hear the pump come on. You see it's just in between 6 and 6.5 pounds, like 6.25 PSI. Now that's just a little bit lower than what I would like to see it, especially in the cool fall air. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the pressure up on this to about 7 PSI, and I'll show you how to do that right now. Okay, on this particular regulator, this is just a standard poly return style regulator. It uses a 5/8 jam nut. So you take a 5/8 wrench, loosen the jam nut, and then we're going to turn the center clockwise to raise the fuel pressure, counterclockwise to lower the fuel pressure. So as you can see here, I want to go to 7 PSI. So I'm going to turn the center adjustment set screw clockwise until we reach 7 PSI, and there it is. Okay? So then what you do, you come over here, turn the jam nut down, take your wrench, snug it up, double check and make sure it hasn't moved. It's dead nuts. So as you can see, the fuel is returning back into standalone. Now what you want to pay attention to is while this system is flowing, just like it is now, you shouldn't hear the fuel pump RPM raise or lower. You shouldn't hear any aeration in the fuel. The pump should sound consistent the whole time it's running. It shouldn't. You shouldn't hear the pump go up and down or do anything erratic. If you hear the pump doing something strange, like the RPM raises and lowers inadvertently, or it's very loud, you may have a problem either with the pump, or you may be starving the pump for fuel. We had this problem earlier this year with this truck, and we actually hurt the engine. That fuel filter right there became clogged with grass and dirt. I don't know how the stuff got in there, but plugged the fuel filter and starved the fuel pump for fuel, leaned the engine out, and we burned a head gasket. Let me turn this off so you can better hear me. Okay. We got the fuel pump shut off. That way you guys can hear me better. I hate to listen to that thing run if I don't need to. So on this truck, I mentioned the other day in one of the, I think the first video of this truck, that we use return style regulators. You don't have to. A lot of people use a deadhead style regulator and they have a lot of success with it. However, it has been my experience that fuel pumps last longer with a return style. And also, since we street race this truck and we no prep race this truck, a lot of the times we are trying to progress one or both kits in over more than 2.5 to 3 seconds. Okay, now let me explain something to you. Look how big the nitrous solenoid is down there. Okay, that's for the fogger. Look how small the fuel solenoid is. The nitrous is under 950,000 psi, but your fuel pressure is only set at 6.5, 7 psi, at least on this particular combination. Now what happens is when you start to progress your nitrous kit in over long periods of time, and what I mean by long periods is over half a second. We're talking about 1.5 to 3 seconds of a ramp, sometimes more than that. What happens is the nitrous solenoid opens and closes rapidly at 1,000 psi, but the fuel pressure solenoid is also opening and closing rapidly at only 7 psi. And what can happen is if you have any air trapped in the fuel system behind your deadhead regulator, okay, the only way for that air to get out of the system is to go through the fuel jet. With a return style regulator, the regulator automatically bleeds the air out of the system back into the top of the tank. This means that when you're progressing the system for long periods of time, you are absolutely 100% certain to get fuel out the nitrous or the fuel jet rather than air pockets. Now what we had trouble with years ago on Billy's truck, when it was on nitrous, we were progressing a 300 shot on a plate for over 3.5 seconds on the street. And what we found was, in watching the air fuel ratio while it was progressing, the air fuel ratio would go all over the place. It would go rich and then lean, and then we would melt plugs. A lot of times we would find a melted plug trying to progress 300 shot in 3.5 seconds or more. And what we found, or at least what I found, was without the return style regulator, we would have air trapped in the fuel lines. And as that thing is trying to progress in, the nitrous comes in immediately. It's under 1,000 psi. But the fuel at low pressure, with any air trapped in the line, there were times when during the progression of the solenoid opening and closing, it was trying to let the air out. And your air fuel ratio would go extremely lean, and we were having trouble melting plugs and damaging things. So from that point on, ever since I put that return style regulator on Billy's truck, we never had that problem again. And so I refuse to use a deadhead style regulator on a standalone nitrous system. And in my opinion, that's the best way to do a nitrous kit. People do it all different ways. Everybody has a different way of doing things, and that's fine. A lot of people have success with a lot of different ways. But this is, in my opinion, the best way to run a nitrous system is with a standalone. It has its own pump, it has its own regulator. Now, a lot of people say you have to have a regulator for each kit, and I agree. You should have a regulator for each kit. However, we're only running a 300 shot in the fogger and 125 in the plate. I've had as much as 225 in the plate and 300 in the fogger and turned it on and didn't hurt anything, and it was god-awful fast. However, we have enough trouble putting it down with this truck, with the chassis the way it is right now, on 4 1/4, because at this point in time, it does not have any adjustable shocks on it. It's just got Napa gas shocks on the front and some old Comp 3-ways on the back. So anyhow, if you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments section. I'd be happy to help everybody as much as I can. This is kind of new to me, obviously. I've only been on YouTube for, what, Billy, a week and a half?
Just about 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. So we're starting to get into some good stuff now. As I get time, I'll start doing some technical things. One of the next things that I want to do is I want to take this truck to CIA Performance in Westerville, and we're going to dyno this thing. So watch for that. I don't think we're going to get it done this week. It'll probably be next week after we get back from English Mountain. If we don't tear it up in English Mountain. I don't think we will. It should be fine. Anyway, one of the things I would like to do is I want to dyno the truck on motor, dyno it on just the plate, dyno it on just the fogger, and then dyno it on both kits. And then I'd like to put that 225 shot back in the plate and turn 5 1/4 on it, because I know what it felt like, and it pulled like a turbo car. It really did. I mean, maybe not as good as some turbo cars, but I'm telling you boys, you put 525 shot to a 415 small block and it's lively. I promise you that. So anyway, that's going to do it for today. Stay tuned. We've got some really good stuff coming, guys, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it.